Hello and good night. Today I'm going to talk about one of the most important events that happened on the other side of the world, in Europe, to be more exact. The French Revolution. The French Revolution was a socio-political event that caused a great impact in French and several European countries. But at the same time, it was a tragic event that killed many people and plunged France into an era of terror. First, you need to have a bit of context about how French society was structured at that time. Before the revolution, French society was divided into three parts, known as three states. And the first state was the monarchy that maintained an absolute control of the state and the citizens. Before and during the French Revolution, the king in power was Louis XVI. In the second state were the nobles and the clergy. The, the nobles owned lands and collect a series of taxes from the peasants who work and live on their lands. The clergy were very close to the crown. That is why they were one of the largest landowners in France. The clergy could collect taxes from their servants, as well as being the only authority that could legitimize marriage and register births, in addition to the fact that the clergy were in charge to providing primary education. But the, but the nobles and the clergy didn't have to pay taxes to the crown, but the nobles and the clergy could take a 10% of the taxes that the crown take from the peasants. In the third state were the peasants and the bourgeoisie. The peasants or working class had a very difficult life since they had to pay quite high taxes, hand over a part of their crowns to the owners of the lands on which they work, while the bourgeoisie they didn't have a life as difficult as the life of a peasant because the bourgeoisie, being mostly merchants or artisans, had a small will. However, they had no power or decision in politics, and as the peasants, they were obligated to pay taxes. As you can see, those times there was a great social inequality, and this was one of the main triggers of the revolution. But it wasn't the only one. Another important factor that triggered the revolution was the economic crisis that France suffered. The king Louis XVI had entrusted to the American War of Independence 2 million pounds sterling, an invest that France never recovered, and that started an economic crisis, an economic collapse that was aggravated by the unnecessary expenses of the military. These expenses really aggravated the economic situation of France and brought more problems for the French peasants. And these problems were at that in 1787 a strong winter ended with the largest French harvest, which produced a shortage of food, which increased the price of bread. This price increase brought a lot of discontent and caused a great famine in the population of France. On the on the other side, uh, the bourgeoisie among them began to born a movement known as the Illustration. This movement said that you will doubt that they had told you. Distrust that the authorities say and think for yourself. The objective of this movement was to illuminate the ignorance of the time, to be able to create a better world in which all citizens have the same rights. All these factors were the cause of the French Revolution. In 1789, the king, Louis XVI, called a meeting in which the representatives of the three states would meet to discuss the problems France was going through. The main complaints came from the third state, but all the solutions they proposed were denied by the upper class. Because of this, the bourgeoisie proposed to create a national assembly with the aim to write a constitution. In this brought discontent, and the king tried to stop this, tried to stop this movement. However, the people were willing to continue being trampled by the crown, and they decided to take up arms. The first victory for the revolution was when they managed to take the fortress of Bastille. The Cry Revolution spread throughout France. At the same time, a constituent assembly was formed that began to implement several changes in France. And in 1791, they signed the first French constitution. The king had to accept all of these changes without being able to oppose, due to the fact that his authority was quite reduced. The king tried to flee to Austria with the hope of receiving help to regain power. However, the king was captured and locked up in the Palace of Tuileries. However, the revolution was not perfect, and there were political tensions among the revolutionaries. When the first legislative assembly met, there were two sides: the Girondins and the Jacobins. The Girondins wanted a state in which the king served only as a symbolic leader, and the Jacobins, under the leadership of the writer Robespierre, wanted to give all the power to the people without king. France was going through a crisis again. Apart from the division of the rebellion, there was also the fear of foreign invasion to defend the king. To avoid a possible invasion, in January of 1793, the king was declared a traitor and was condemned to the guillotine. However, the fear of a possible invasion was still present, and taking advantage of this, the Jacobins took power, and their leader, Maximilien Robespierre, began the so-called Era of Terror, a period of time that lasted 2 years, during which thousands of people were executed by guillotine, accused or being suspicious of being against the revolution. Robespierre believed that using these methods would ensure that all French people would always be on the side of the revolution. However, in 1794, the people got tired. They organized again to end the rule of the Jacobins, and in the same year, Robespierre was executed by guillotine. In 1795, the National Assembly met again to write a new constitution and form a new government. However, his new government was quite unstable, and taking advantage of this, In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte launched a coup that established a government with Napoleon being the Emperor of France. The new government the new government solved several of the problems caused by the revolution. With this, the end of the French Revolution will come. Well, this is all for me about this period of history. Thanks for watching and goodbye.